Dear beautiful people, today I want to talk to you about the difference between pity and compassion, because this gets often confused. You see, when I have a student sitting in Zazen and they experience very strong emotion arising, suddenly they become conscious of emotional energy that was trapped within the physical body or within their aura or energy field, and they now suddenly start expressing that emotion. Then they might be in resistance to that emotions because they feel ashamed or guilty about expressing it. And this is something that we have learned as children, that many of our parents have in that sense been teaching us something that is on a very deep level incorrect. They've been teaching us that there is a thing that we call negative emotion and there is a thing that we call positive emotion. There is emotion that we want and there's emotion that we don't want. And this is the birth of neurosis and the birth of the ego. I give you a very simple explanation for that. Let's say as a child you start expressing certain emotions, but your parents cannot integrate those emotions. They feel overwhelmed by it. Now they start an attempt at negating those emotions by saying, well, if you express those emotions, then we punish you or we ignore you. So since children are very intelligent, what they very quickly learn, oh, if I play a certain role, if I pretend not to feel that way, then I will be loved, then I don't get punished, and then I get what I want. So as a child, we learn at some point to suppress certain emotions and in that sense trap this emotional energy within the system. This is the birth of mental illness, of neurosis. This is also the birth of the ego. Because we start playing a role that when we are a child, we need to play this role because you are in a very powerless position. But this role is something that you keep playing maybe as a teenager and as an adult, and at some point you do not know that you're playing this role anymore. You have identified with it, and this is the ego. So from that moment on, this role that you have been playing, this conditioning takes over and makes choices for you. So if I have this student sitting there in Zazen and suddenly an emotion that has been suppressed for years surfaces, they often fall into a body language that is one of a victim. So suddenly they lose their posture, they bend forward, they tension their body up, they tension their hands up, their jaws, their shoulders. So basically they have a fight or flight response because their nervous system has learned for years, this is a negative emotion, this is scary, we don't allow this. Because the result of it is pain or withdrawal or isolation. So as such, in order to be compassionate and not pitying the being that is having that experience, it is tremendously important then to say, sit straight, drop your shoulders, relax your jaw, breathe in deeply into the stomach. Why is this the case? Because now we're teaching the nervous system something new. We teach the nervous system, no matter what emotion or stimulus, no matter if we call it internal or external experience, we teach the nervous system it is not a problem. That means when we sit up straight, when we breathe deeply, when we drop our shoulders and our jaw, we do not have a fight or flight response despite that emotion. So we do not build up muscle tension. Therefore, there is no energy blockage, and that means the emotion can dissipate. It is being transformed. But if we would allow the fight or flight response, the traumatic memory gets just reconditioned back into the system. So if we say, oh, you poor little you're a victim to the experience, it's so sad that you cry, right? Then we, in that sense, we support the role, we support the identity, the ego, we recondition it into the nervous system. This is not what we want to do if we are compassionate. But we have been told in society, if someone cries, to pity them, to think of them as small, to think of them as a victim to their story. But this is exactly what often prevents healing. In order to heal, we need to be able to detach ourselves from the experience, therefore allowing the experience, so those emotions can be processed. This is very similar to trauma therapy. To be able to provide a setting in which the fight or flight response does not happen anymore. So in order to be compassionate, it is important not to treat people based on their story, based on their narrative, based on who they think they are, because that is illusion. One of my students said one time that she's just a human. And I said, this is where you're confused. You see, just because you think of yourself as a human being and you don't know yourself as a Buddha does not make you less than a Buddha, and I will not treat you less than a Buddha. This might be very uncomfortable to the ego. It might at first go against everything they've learned in society, but ultimately this leads to liberation from suffering. Because we're not supporting the illusion, we're not supporting the identity or the narrative, the role that has been played and that we started identifying with. We are supporting the consciousness that observes that role being played, that observes the personality, that at some point awakens and then brings order into the chaos. And this is where the liberation and the end of suffering comes from. It doesn't come from supporting people in their victim stories. And this is why sometimes when people are still trapped in their ego, they think, oh, their spiritual teacher is so hard on them, their Zen teacher is so hard on them. But in truth, those teachers know already where the travel is going. And they do understand, if I support them in their story, the suffering will continue. So therefore, out of compassion, sometimes we need to be a little strict. So when there's very strong emotion coming up, it's important for someone, when in meditation practice, to not change the posture, to not create a fight or flight response, to be willing to feel pain. And that even has a deeper meaning, because usually most creatures in existence will try to avoid pain and move towards pleasure. But these obviously are animal instincts. And in order to spiritually awaken, we need to go beyond animal instincts. So as such, we need to be willing to feel the pain that is stored up within the system. And this is how we dissolve it, and we increase in frequency and energy, and therefore in awareness. This is the integration process. So as such, in order to be compassionate, it is very important to understand that that can mean to be uncomfortable. And if you want to express compassion towards yourself, it's tremendously important, for example, when you sit in meditation and you experience pain or discomfort, to allow yourself to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when you learn that, you learn how to not react to external stimulus, to internal stimulus, and you stop generating emotions that cause suffering for you. So therefore the practice is, get uncomfortable. Contemplate about that, be well.